Hey my friends, welcome back to Thrills and Kills Booktube. I'm Sarah. So on this channel we talk about horror and thrillers and everything sort of dark and twisty. Now obviously we're moving into winter. We kind of had all the fun with spooky season with Halloween, and then I took a little bit of a break from social media for some health issues for the month of November, but I'm back. I'm not quite 100%, but I'm almost there. So today we're going to talk about horror and thriller books that are perfect for the cold weather season. So either they are set in the cold or winter, it plays a big part of the plot, or they just give you that really bone-chilling feeling. I have 13 books here to talk about, horror and thriller. Some of them are a mix of the two, or somewhere in between. Some of them are pretty well known to those of us who read horror and thrillers, but some of these I think either you've never heard of them before or you haven't heard of them in a long time. So let's get into it. The first one I have, this is more of a thriller, and in fact on the front cover it says a splendid gothic thriller. This is The Sanatorium by Sarah Pierce. So this book is set in the Alps. It is a thriller that takes place during a big snowstorm in the Swiss Alps around a sanatorium. So if you're not familiar, back in the 1800s with tuberculosis outbreaks, they would build medical facilities that are sort of isolated called sanatoriums, where people would go and try and recuperate. Well, at the time they would call it consumption. We don't call it that anymore. So a lot of horror and thriller books and movies take place in sanatoriums or surrounding sanatoriums, because just by the nature of being an isolated facility, that right there is a good setting for a scary book. Let me read you the little synopsis. So it says, half hidden by forests and overshadowed by threatening peaks, Le Sommet, whether I'm saying that, I don't know if I'm saying that right, has always been a sinister place. Long plagued by troubling rumors, the former abandoned sanatorium has since been renovated into a 5-star minimalist hotel. An imposing, isolated getaway spot in the Swiss Alps is the last place Ellen Warner wants to be. But Ellen's taken time off from her job as a detective, so when her estranged brother Isaac and his fiancée Lauren invite her to celebrate their engagement at the hotel, she really has no reason not to accept. I don't know, I would not have accepted, but I also don't like people. Arriving in the midst of a threatening storm, Ellen immediately feels on edge. There's something about the hotel that makes her nervous, and when they wake the following morning to discover Lauren is missing, Ellen must trust her instincts if they hope to find her. They probably won't find her. With the storm closing off all access to the hotel, the longer Lauren stays missing, the more the remaining guests start to panic. Ellen is under pressure to find Lauren, but no one has yet realized that another woman has gone missing, and she's the only one who could have warned them just how much danger they are all in. Now this has been on my TBR for quite some time. I think I've actually had this on my bookshelf for 1.5 years. I've been wanting to get to it. It looks like it was part of Reese Witherspoon's book club, which doesn't tend to bode well for me, but I have read a lot of good things about this book, a lot of good praise from people on every platform, Goodreads, YouTube, Instagram. So I really would like to get to that soon, but isn't that a tale as old as time that we want to get to all of our books soon? It's not the thinnest book, it's almost 400 pages, and it does have like some small type, so not one that I can finish in one setting. That sounds really great though. I love books that take place in abandoned like sanatoriums or asylums, that kind of thing. Okay. This next one, I don't know what you could qualify it. It's sort of it is historical fiction, but it's more of like a murder mystery thriller aspect. And this used to be my favorite all-time book for a few years. And this is Burial Rites by Hannah Kent. And I haven't seen this discussed anywhere in a few years. So this takes place in Iceland in the winter. That's why it fits into the theme of this video. But you follow someone who has been charged with murder. And let me just read the back because I won't be able to do justice. Charged with the brutal murder of 2 men, Agnes, Magnus' daughter, has been removed to her homeland's furthest reaches, to an isolated farm in northern Iceland to await execution. Horrified at the prospect of housing a convicted murderer, the family on the farm avoids Agnes. Only Toti, a priest Agnes has chosen to be her spiritual guardian, seeks to understand her. As the winter months pass by and Agnes' death looms closer, The farmer's wife and daughters learn there is another side to the sensational tale they've heard. But will their new knowledge be enough to save Agnes? Hannah Kent makes exhilaratingly real the saga of a doomed young woman who in the early 19th century became the last person to be publicly beheaded in Iceland. Rich with lyricism and startling in its revelations, Burial Rites evokes a dramatic existence in a distant time and place as it poses a heartbreaking question. How can one woman hope to endure when her life depends on the stories told by others? Now, it's been a few years since I read this. Like I said, this was my favorite book at one point in time for a few years running. And I just remember reading this and being instantly transported to a very cold and desolate, isolated northern Iceland. She did such a good job with writing the scenery, the setting. You really felt like you were there, and being in the head space of someone who is just basically watching the clock tick down until the day that she knows that she is going to be executed and that there's nothing she can do. Like it says, your life depends on stories told by others. And it is based on a real person. Like I said, the last woman to be publicly executed in Iceland. I really enjoyed it. This book is how many pages? About 300 pages, so you can read it pretty quickly. If you're looking for something a little bit different, not quite horror or thriller, but something that's like adjacent to that, I would recommend Burial Rites. Okay, this next book. I have tried so many times to get through this and I haven't been able to, so I think I'm just gonna have to give up and just watch the mini-series, but it is perfect for this time of year and for cold weather books. That is Dan Simmons' The Terror. Now, this book is a little bit beat up, and the story behind that is that I took a trip to Ukraine earlier this year with the humanitarian group to provide medical care, and for some reason I thought, let me bring the chunkiest book that I own, because I only have room for one book in my backpack, and I want to bring this. Well, let me tell you, March in Ukraine is pretty cold, especially when you're in a bomb shelter and there's no electricity, so this was the last freaking thing I wanted to read while I was over there. And since I've been home, I've tried, and like I said, it's just a chunker. It's not that it's not interesting, it's just I have a very hard time staying interested in any one thing for this amount of time. It's almost 800 pages, so I think I'm just gonna have to watch the mini-series. But let me read you the little synopsis. The men on board HMS Terror, part of the 1845 Franklin expedition, the first steam-powered vessels ever to search for the legendary Northwest Passage, are entering a second summer in the Arctic Circle without a thaw, stranded in a nightmarish landscape of encroaching ice and darkness. Endlessly cold, they struggle to survive with poisonous rations, a dwindling coal supply, and ships buckling in the grip of crushing ice. But their real enemy is even more terrifying. There is something out there in the frigid darkness, an unseen predator stalking their ship, a monstrous terror clawing to get in. Like I said, it sounds super interesting. I do not have the attention span for that. It is on AMC. I think you can pay for it through Amazon Prime to be able to watch it, so I'm just gonna have to go that route. All right, this next book, this is one of my favorite reads of 2021. It's a quick read. It is also an adaptation on Hulu, but it was garbage and I don't recommend it. So this is Taylor Adams' No Exit. This is a very fast-paced thriller that takes place in the middle of a massive snowstorm at a visitor's center. Like, you know, when you pull off the highway to like a rest stop in Colorado. So we follow Darby, and she is headed home because her mom is in the hospital, but this massive snowstorm happens, the road is shut down, so she pulls over to spend the night at this rest stop, and there's a few other people there. And they're kind of like sizing each other up, trying to figure out like, oh, what brought you here? So then at one point, Darby goes outside, she's trying to find like just even one bar of cell service to be able to make a call or a text out, and she sees a hand in a van. And she realized that there is a child trapped in a cage inside this van. And so now she is trying to figure out who amongst the group is the one that has kidnapped and is keeping this child out there in the cold, and how can she rescue this child and get out of there before someone notices that she's escaped. But they're snowed in, there's no cell service, and she doesn't know who she can trust and who she can't. So in the book, it does just a really good job of showing Darby's thought process, and the whole time she's like scheming and trying to stay a step or two ahead of the perpetrator. I won't tell you who it is. Obviously she goes through iterations of who she thinks it is going to be. And like I said, the book just does a really good job of showing how she is fighting for her life physically and like mentally, being able to play this chess game with this person or people. The movie on Hulu, it didn't. It just kind of showed her as like fumbling her way through this situation and sort of making like Hail Mary attempts. It didn't show how smart like the real character in the book was and how she really was thinking her way out of this situation. So if that sounds interesting to you, I would recommend the book. Don't even go near the movie. It was trash. I hated it. Okay, these next two are actually short story collections. I've not read them in their entirety, but I have read some of the stories and really enjoy them. The first one, this, I will probably not pronounce this right. This is called Taktumi, an anthology of Arctic horror stories. And it's just this beautiful cover. Let me see if I can show you. This beautiful cover of a crow, I believe. Or is it a raven? I don't know. Sometimes it's hard to tell. But yeah, Taktumi, an anthology of Arctic horror stories. So on the back, it actually says that Taktumi is an Inuktitut word. I wish I could say that correctly. It's obviously a First Person's tribe up from the Arctic Circle, but an Inuktitut word that means in the dark. And these spine-tingling horror stories by northern writers show just how dangerous darkness can be. A family clinging to survival out on the tundra after a vicious zombie virus. A door that beckons, waiting to unleash the terror behind it. A post-apocalyptic community in the far north where things aren't quite what they seem. Chilling tales from award-winning authors Richard Van Camp, Rachel and Sean Quitzelik Tinsley, Aviak Johnston, and others. This collection will thrill and entertain even the most seasoned horror fan. So, actually, how many stories are in this? So there are 9 stories in here. I've actually only read 2. But I just really enjoy how different that is. Other than Stephen Graham Jones, this is the only book that I have with Indigenous authors, and I would like to read more. But I mean, especially like Arctic Circle far north, I feel like we don't ever really get any representation from those communities. So I would recommend this. It's very short, but obviously since it's a short story collection, you don't have to read the whole book. You can just read 1 or 2 at a time. And it's perfect, well, for any time of the year, but perfect for the cold weather. Now this next one, again, short story collection. This is volume 1. I believe there are multiple volumes, and this is the Valancourt book of Victorian Christmas ghost stories. And they all have these really neat covers. So see how you can see the skull is there, but from back here it just looks like a Christmas tree. And yes, these are Victorian, so obviously it's not going to be modern day writing, but I feel like they do a good job of hand selecting ones that are easier to understand. And I did not know this, before I picked this up rather, that in Victorian times, you know, it was the main form of entertainment, especially in the dark, cold winter months with very little sunshine, was to sit around the fire and families would read ghost stories. Like it was kind of its heyday of back then. So that's where we get Charles Dickens with A Christmas Carol and many other ghost stories. So it actually says on the back of this that during the Victorian era, it became traditional for publishers of newspapers and magazines to print ghost stories during the Christmas season for chilling winter reading by the fireside or candlelight. Now, for the first time, 13 of these tales are collected here, including a wide range of stories from a diverse group of authors, some well-known, others anonymous or forgotten. I will say, which was the one that was really freaking scary? Actually, I think the first 2 books, the Tapestried Chamber and the Old Nurse's Story, I thought those were particularly scary. The Old Nurse's Story is by Elizabeth Gaskell, which she is pretty known as a Victorian Gothic horror author. There's many stories in here that are anonymous, but then we also do have one by Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of Sherlock Holmes. So yeah, there's many different, I think maybe 3 or even 4 volumes now. This is the only one I have. They all have different beautiful covers. I would like to collect the rest of them, but I definitely suggest that, especially if you just want like a quick little story to read to get you in the spooky Christmas mood. Okay, this next book. This is one of my favorite thrillers, also One by One by Ruth Ware. So Ruth Ware is really one of my favorite thriller authors. It comes down between her and Jennifer McMahon, who we will see in a moment. So this one by Ruth Ware is sort of like a modern version of Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. So we've got sort of a corporate retreat, and they are in a Swiss ski chalet up in the Alps, and there is a private cook, and there's, I think, like a maid or a servant. And then there is unfortunately a avalanche, and someone does not make it back to the cabin, and so they start to panic, and they start missing other people and then blaming each other, and more panic ensues, and it's like the Agatha Christie book, And Then There Were None. It's a whodunit, trying to figure out, is there a murderer in the cabin, and if so, who, and how could they have gotten away with it? But I feel like she particularly does a really good job in this book of writing this sense of claustrophobia. Kind of like, imagine if you were trapped under the snow of an avalanche, you would feel claustrophobic, closed in on all sides. That's the sense that Ruth Ware gives in this book. And also touches on rather like toxic work culture and having to work with toxic co-workers a little bit. So I thought that was really interesting. But yes, it's getting snowed in at a luxurious rustic ski chalet high in the Alps. Doesn't sound like the worst problem in the world, especially when there's a breathtaking vista, a full-service chef and housekeeper, a cozy fire to keep you warm, and others to keep you company. Unless that company happens to be 8 co-workers, each with something to gain, something to lose, and something to hide. And because it's Ruth Ware, there's going to be multiple twists and turns, and you're not going to see it coming. She does a very good job at that. However, there is one author who does a slightly better job, in my opinion, and that would be Jennifer McMahon. She is my all-time favorite thriller writer, and so if you're looking for a top-notch thriller for this time of year when it's cold and you want to wrap up in a blanket with some hot tea, The Winter People by Jennifer McMahon. This was my first novel of hers that I ever read, and I was instantly hooked, and so she is an auto-buy author for me. It doesn't even matter what the book's about. She could rewrite the dictionary, and I would probably buy it at this point. So this takes place in Vermont, like many of her books. Some secrets never die. West Hall, Vermont has always been a town of strange disappearances and old legends. The most mysterious is that of Sarah Harrison Shea, who in 1908 was found dead in the field behind her house, just months after the tragic death of her daughter. Now, in present day, 19-year-old Ruthie lives in Sarah's farmhouse with her mother Alice and her younger sister Fawn. Alice has always insisted that they live off the grid, a decision that has weighty consequences when Ruthie wakes up one morning to find that Alice has vanished. In her search for clues, she is startled to uncover a copy of Sarah Harrison Shea's diary hidden beneath the floorboards of her mother's bedroom, which isn't that convenient. Ruthie gets sucked into the historical mystery. She discovers that she's not the only person looking for someone they've lost, but she may be the only one who can stop history from repeating itself. So, as with any thriller, but especially Jennifer McMahon's, I think it's best to go in not knowing a whole lot. I don't want to give you any more information than what I've already given you. Just know that, in my opinion, she is the master at twists and turns, and I almost envision that she has to have like a huge whiteboard the length of her wall where she's keeping track of everything, because I just don't understand how someone can keep track of so many different timelines and characters and narrators and twists and turns within twists, and she just does such a good job. Okay, so that's all the books I have in physical format. Let's talk about a few of my Kindle books. Now, this first one, actually, I know I have a physical copy of it somewhere. I've looked all over the place. I even have boxes down in my basement. I can't find it, and I'm so upset because the cover is beautiful and it's a very good book. So this is Wolf Winter. I'll have to put a picture here. This is another book that's not quite horror or thriller. It's, I guess, technically historical fiction, but there definitely is like a murder mystery, supernatural thriller element to it. So this takes place in 1700s Sweden. It actually takes place in a part of Sweden called Lapland, which I had to look that up where that is. So I'll put a little picture here so you can see what we're talking about. So it's just a very, like I said, suspenseful, maybe it's supernatural, maybe not. You're supposed to kind of question that, historical thriller in 1700s Sweden. So let me read you the description, and there are words I know I'm not going to pronounce correctly because I don't speak Swedish. Okay, Swedish Lapland, 1717. Maja and her husband Paavo and her daughters Frederica and Dorothea arrive from their native Finland, hoping to forget the traumas of their past and put down new roots in this harsh but beautiful land. Above them looms Black Jan, a mountain whose foreboding presence looms over the valley and whose dark history seems to haunt the lives of those who live in its shadow. While herding the family's goats on the mountain, Frederica happens upon the mutilated body of one of their neighbors, Eriksson. The death is dismissed as a wolf attack, but Maja feels certain that the wounds could only have been inflicted by another man. Compelled to investigate, despite her neighbor's strange disinterest in the death and the fate of Eriksson's widow, Maja is drawn into the dark history of tragedies and betrayals that have taken place on the Black Jan. Young Frederica finds herself pulled towards the mountain as well, feeling something none of the adults around her seem to notice. As the seasons change and the wolf winter, the harshest winter in memory, descends upon the settlers, Paavo travels to find work, and Maja finds herself struggling for her family's survival in this land of winter-long darkness. As the snow gathers, the settlers' secrets are increasingly laid bare. Scarce resources and the never-ending darkness force them to come together. Soon, Maja discovers the true cost of survival under the mountain and what it will take to make it to spring. So, again, not going to tell you much more, but that book came out in 2015, and I don't think I've really ever seen it discussed anywhere. It also does a very good job of setting the scene, making you feel like, oh my god, we're in this isolated, freezing cold destination with our literal survival, like, you know, day to day, not knowing if we're going to make it or not. There is, like I said, this supernatural element where our main character thinks that there's some supernatural aspect, but everyone around her is like, no, these are just wolves, like, you're new here, what would you know, like, trust us. But she and her daughter are convinced, like, something's not right. These townspeople there's something that they're not telling us. And it also just kind of talks, you know, the theme around humanity and what happens when there's no one that you can trust and you start turning on each other, I guess is the way to put it. So I really enjoyed that one. Again, I'm not going to give you too many more thoughts because a lot of the book, what's good about it is your interpretation of what do you think is the actual cause of what's happening, and at what point in the book do you make up your mind about what's actually happening. It's very good. Okay, so this next book is a nonfiction book about the Donner Party misadventures, and this is called The Indifferent Stars Above, the harrowing saga of the Donner Party. So if you have ever taken an American history class, you know that these settlers made a series of mistakes of the Donner Party, and they unfortunately got stuck up in the mountains in winter and had to wait it out until the snow melted to be able to make their way, I think, across the Sierra Nevadas. There was some cannibalism involved. So this, I haven't read it yet. I've read other books about this unfortunate situation. I've heard that this one is very, very good. I have it on my Kindle. In April 1846, 21-year-old Sarah Graves, intent on a better future, sets out from Illinois with her new husband, her parents, and 8 siblings. 7 months later, after joining a party of pioneers led by George Donner, they reach the Sierra Nevada mountains. As the heavy snows of the season close the pass ahead of them. In early December, starving and desperate, Sarah and 14 others set out for California on snowshoes, and over the next 32 days, endured almost unfathomable hardships and horrors. In this gripping narrative, best-selling author Daniel James Brown sheds new light on one of the most legendary events in American history. Following every painful footstep of Sarah's journey with the Donner Party, Brown produces a tale both spellbinding and richly informative. So I don't know actually if this particular person did survive. I knew there were some survivors. I'm not sure about her. So like I said, I actually bought this January of 2022. So it's been waiting to get read for a while. Obviously a very depressing book, especially because you know it's true. Very dark part of American history. But I think very appropriate if it's a snowy, cold, dark, bleak, depressing book that you are looking for. All right, speaking of dark, snowy, cold, depressing, I do have a thriller that is set in Antarctica, and this is just called The Dark by Emma Houghton. One dead body, 12 suspects, and 24-hour darkness. So this is another kind of whodunit. There is a Dr. Kate North, and so she has been dealing with a lot of personal tragedies lately, and she's sort of wanting to reset her life. And so she is approached about taking this position to go down to Antarctica to a research station and be their physician. So it says she jumped when she's offered the opportunity at the UN research station in Antarctica. The previous Dr. Jean-Luc has died in a tragic accident out on the ice. The move seems an ideal solution for her. No one knows about her past, no one is checking up on her, but as total darkness descends for the winter, she begins to suspect that Jean-Luc's death was not accidental at all. Now this book came out in 2021, but again, I've not really heard anything about it. It doesn't have the best reviews. It has like, I think 3.5 on Goodreads, but it just sounds so interesting to me. I have never read any other books set in Antarctica, let alone like a research station where it's darkness for 24 hours a day and you can't go outside. So I think that'll be similar to Ruth Ware's One by One or Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None, a typical whodunit story. Isolated setting, claustrophobic setting, a cold setting. So all that sounds perfect for this time of year. All right, 2 more books. This next one is through Kindle Unlimited. And this is a Darcy Coates book. I read my first ever Darcy Coates book earlier this year, which was Gallows Hill. But this one is totally different, going in a different direction. And this is Voices in the Snow, a black winter novel. I really enjoyed Gallows Hill, but that was a sort of a haunted house book. Hopefully I'll like this one, but I know that she's well known for her haunted house books. So let me read this to you because I haven't read this yet. Claire remembers the cold. She remembers abandoned cars and children's toys littered across the road. She remembers dark shapes in the snow and a terror she can't explain, and then nothing. When she wakes, aching and afraid in a stranger's gothic home, he tells her there was an accident. He claims he saved her. Claire wants to leave, but a vicious snowstorm had blanketed the world in white, trapping them together, and there's nothing she can do but wait. This sounds a little bit like Misery, which unfortunately I didn't put on this list, but that is one of my favorite movies of all time. This is sounding a little bit like the plot to Misery. At least the stranger seems kind, but Claire doesn't know if she can trust him. He promised they were alone here, but she sees and hears things that convince her something else is creeping about the surrounding woods, watching and waiting. Between the claustrophobic storm and the inescapable sense of being hunted, Claire is on edge and increasingly certain of one thing. Her car crash was not an accident. Misery. I'm telling you, it's misery. Something is waiting for her to step outside the fragile safety of the house. Something monstrous, something unfeeling, and something desperately hungry. So definitely very different from Gallows Hill. I hope that I will like that because I know Darcy Coates has many, many books, and I want to read more of her stuff, particularly because a lot of them are on Kindle Unlimited. Now this says it's book 1 of 4, Black Winter. And this came out in 2019. Let's see, are there others? Oh yeah, so there's actually the whole 4. So it's Voices in the Snow, Secrets in the Dark, Whispers in the Mist, and Silence in the Shadows. It's a 4-book series and they're all available on Kindle Unlimited. Okay, this last book is also a thriller and takes place in a very snowy, isolated setting. And this is Alice Feeney's Rock, Paper, Scissors. Now I enjoyed this, not my favorite of Alice Feeney's. Her latest, Daisy Darker, is my favorite book of hers, but I did enjoy this one. So in this book, we are following a couple in their marriage. Kind of needs a jump start. They're not doing that great. And they win a weekend away up in like an Airbnb that's set in an old church, an abandoned church, in a very isolated village up in Scotland. Yes, Scotland. And so the husband has this really interesting condition where it's called face blindness. So he cannot actually recognize people. So even his own wife, he can be walking down the street and bump into her and not recognize that it's her from her face. So they go up here because they're trying to rekindle their relationship, and it's their anniversary. And every year they write each other letters. And so throughout the book is interspersed letters to each other. So it says they both know this weekend will make or break their marriage, but they didn't randomly win this trip. One of them is lying, and someone doesn't want them to live happily ever after. 10 years of marriage, 10 years of secrets, and an anniversary they will never forget. Rock, Paper, Scissors is a domestic thriller from the queen of the killer twist, Alice Feeney. So it definitely takes place in a cold, isolated setting, lots of snow. There is a dog. Nothing bad happens to the dog. I was really worried about that when I was reading it. And there is definitely a twist that's unique that I did not see coming. Some of the other twists I did see coming. There is sort of a cameo by a horror author, like a well-known author in there, which is kind of cool. I liked it, but again, not my absolute favorite of her books. It just wasn't necessarily memorable. Like, I actually had to read that to jog my memory, and I read this less than a year ago. I think I read it at the beginning of 2022. Okay, so those are my recommendations if you're looking for cold weather, horror, or thriller scary books to set you in the mood. However, I live down south, so although it's starting to get cold, it's not going to be snowy for a long time. This weekend over Thanksgiving, it actually was in the 60s and sunny, which right now it's actually 60 and sunny. I'm like burning up in this. So if you need some inspiration, because it's not cold nor snowy where you live, or even if it already is and you want to get more so into the mood, those are my recommendations for you. Let me know, are you looking forward to reading any snowy, scary books? And what are you planning to read for December? I'm just starting to get my Christmas decor out. I don't really have anything fall, so I basically had all my Halloween decor out until Thanksgiving, and now I'm swapping it out for winter Christmassy stuff. So let me know if you guys put your trees up already, because I still have to do that. So that's all I have for you today. Have a good one and stay spooky, my friends.